My parents left their entire estate, house, savings, everything, to my brother because he has kids. I got nothing, not a penny. And I might have swallowed that betrayal quietly until the bank called and said I owed $82,000 on a loan I never signed, a loan they forged in my name. That's when I realized they didn't just forget me, they used me. And what I uncovered next changed everything. My name is Rachel Klein. I'm 38, child-free by choice, and for over a decade, I was the primary caregiver to my aging parents. No one asked me to do it. No one had to. It was expected in that quiet, suffocating way that families like mine do so well, where duty wears the disguise of love, and guilt is the inheritance passed down more reliably than money. I didn't plan on becoming the one who managed doctor's appointments, bathed my mother during her flare-ups, paid for my father's prescription refills when Medicare came up short. But when their health started unraveling in their early 70s, I stepped in. Not because I was the oldest, not because I lived closest, but because I was there. And my brother, Ethan, wasn't. Ethan is 3 years younger, married, 2 kids, busy job in finance, suburbs, golden boy. I remember once when Mom had a bad fall, slipped in the kitchen, broke her wrist, and bruised half her face. I called him in a panic from the ER. "Do you think you can come?" I asked. I didn't even say help, just come. He hesitated. "We've got Sophie's recital tonight," he said. I told him not to worry. I didn't say what I wanted to, that he hadn't worried about them in years. Back then, I was working remotely as a freelance editor, which meant I could shuttle them to their appointments between deadlines, coordinate physical therapy visits from the dining room table, and argue with insurance agents on speakerphone while I cooked lentil soup. It meant I didn't sleep right for years, that I developed chronic lower back pain from lifting Mom off the floor too many times, that I said no to vacations, relationships, weekend trips, even weddings because I can't leave them alone right now. They were grateful in the polite passing way people say thank you for a favor they didn't want to need. But there were no long talks about how much I was giving up. No real acknowledgement of what I was losing, time, energy, any shot at the kind of life my brother got to build uninterrupted. And I told myself I didn't need that I wasn't doing it for some kind of payoff. But deep down, maybe I did think, at least I'm showing up. At least I'm proving myself. Because the truth is, when you're the dependable one, the responsible one, the one who fills in the gaps, people stop seeing you as someone who might need anything in return. You become the furniture, the reliable armchair that holds the weight. My parents leaned on me so long I forgot what it felt like to stand up straight. But I had hope, not for praise or parades, but for fairness, maybe not an even split. Ethan had a mortgage after all and 2 young kids. But something, a recognition. I remember once when Dad had a lucid moment during his memory decline, he looked at me and said, "You'll understand someday why we did what we did." I didn't ask what he meant. I thought I had time. He died in December. My mother passed 6 months later. The grief hit in strange, quiet waves. I wasn't devastated in the way people write about in poems. I had already mourned them slowly, year by year, as their bodies shrank and their worlds got smaller. When the final paperwork started arriving, I opened it with a numb sort of curiosity, like checking the weather for a city you no longer live in. The will came in a manila envelope sent by a family attorney I hadn't seen since I was 15. It was short, precise, clear. Everything was left to Ethan. Because he has children, the will said, as if legacies are measured only in bloodlines. As if my years didn't count because they didn't result in grandkids. There wasn't even a note. Not a single sentence acknowledging the years I gave them. No letter of thanks. No apology. No explanation beyond that hollow sentence. "You'll understand someday." But I didn't. Not then. Not even close. The understanding came later. It came with a phone call from the bank. And what I learned after that? That's when the real betrayal started. It was a Tuesday morning in early April. One of those gray, indecisive days in New York where spring can't quite make up its mind. I had just finished editing a policy brief for a nonprofit client and was half listening to a true crime podcast while cleaning the kitchen when my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, local area code. I almost didn't answer. "Miss Klein?" a clipped voice asked when I picked up. "This is David Larkin from First Horizon Bank. I'm calling regarding your late parents' property in Mount Kisco." I frowned. The house had been transferred to Ethan, or so I assumed. "Is this about the estate?" I asked. There was a pause. "Actually, no. It's regarding a home equity loan tied to your name, taken out 5 years ago. There appears to be an outstanding balance." At first, I thought he had the wrong person. "What? Number, I didn't take out a loan. That house isn't even mine. It was never mine." He hesitated again. "You're listed as the co-borrower. In fact, according to our documents, you signed off on it." And that's when the buzzing started in my ears. That soft panic fuzz, like a hornet trapped in a jar. "I'm sorry," I said slowly. "That's not possible. I never signed for any loan, not for that house." He told me he'd email the documentation, that I could review it and call him back. I barely remember the rest of the conversation. My hands were shaking as I hung up, my chest tight. Within minutes, the email landed in my inbox, attached, scanned copies of paperwork I had never seen before, loan documents dated August 2018, a sizable amount, $82,000, borrowed against the equity in the Mount Kisco property. The signatures were there, bold and official. One was my father's, familiar and sharp. The other was mine, except it wasn't. It looked like mine. The loops in the R, the downward slope of the K. But I hadn't signed that paper. I knew it with the certainty of someone who remembers every single document she's ever been afraid to sign. I stared at the screen, heart pounding in my throat. Forged. It had to be forged. And the date, August 2018, hit me like a slap. That was around the time I'd taken my mom to 5 different specialists for her hip, when I was spending entire weeks at their house, when my mail was still being delivered there before I finally rented the little place in White Plains. They had access to my Social Security number. They had my old signature on file. My dad had been an accountant before he retired. He knew how to make things look official. I felt cold. Not the kind of cold you fix with a sweater. A cold that sank into my bones and sat there like rot. Why would they do this? That question looped through my head as I stared at the documents. Why would my parents, use my name to secure a loan? Did they really think I'd never find out? Or had they thought they'd die before it mattered? That it would just disappear with them? And then, the worst thought, what if they knew it would land on me eventually and they did it anyway? I couldn't sit still. I paced the kitchen. I pulled out my laptop and started digging through old emails, text chains, calendar entries from 2018. Nothing mentioned a loan, nothing even hinted at it. But there had been that one weird moment, I remembered it now, where my mom asked me to sign something for the insurance. Just a quick scribble on a clipboard. I hadn't even looked at it. I was making her soup at the time. Could it have been that? Had she baited me into signing something else entirely? Number, that didn't track. The signature was too perfect, and the loan terms too clean. This wasn't a mistake. This was planned. I felt like the floor had dropped out under me. I called the bank back. I demanded to know why no one had contacted me earlier. Mr. Larkin, now slightly defensive, explained that while the loan was jointly signed, payments had always been made on time until a month ago, after my mother's passing. When the estate was probated and the property transferred solely to my brother, they assumed the loan would be paid out through that process. Except it wasn't, because my parents never told anyone it existed. Not Ethan, not the attorney, certainly not me. And now, because my name was on the documents, the debt was legally mine. I hung up the phone and sat down at the kitchen table. I didn't cry, not yet. I just sat there, heart pounding, staring at the computer like it had betrayed me. They had left Ethan the house, the savings, the car, everything. And they had left me a debt I didn't even know I carried. This wasn't an oversight. This was a setup. And I was just starting to realize how deep it went. The first call to Ethan went straight to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. I didn't trust my voice to stay steady, and I wasn't ready to condense what had just detonated in my world into a few seconds of calm explanation. So I texted him instead. "We need to talk. Call me ASAP. It's about the house." He called back 2 hours later, sounding annoyed, like I'd interrupted his afternoon tennis lesson or school pickup. "What's going on? Is this about the estate again?" I didn't bother with pleasantries. "Did you know about the home equity loan?" A pause. "What loan?" "The $82,000 loan our parents took out against the Mount Kisco house in 2018, the one they took in my name." He didn't respond right away. When he finally did, his voice was careful. Too careful. "No, I didn't know about that." But there was a hesitation in it. A strain, a giveaway. "Are you sure?" I pressed. "Why would I lie, Rachel?" "I was as surprised as you when the will came through. I didn't even know they had that kind of debt." I exhaled slowly, trying to measure him through the phone. "The bank contacted me because I'm on the loan. The payment stopped after Mom passed. Since I'm listed, the responsibility defaults to me. They forged my signature, Ethan." "Jesus," he muttered. "Are you serious?" "Yes, and you need to understand what this means. I'm on the hook for it, financially, legally." Another pause. "But if they left me the house, shouldn't that cover it?" I wanted to scream. Instead, I said, if they'd disclosed the loan, the estate attorney could have used part of the assets to settle the debt. But they didn't. You inherited everything clean. The loan never came up in probate. Now I'm left with a massive debt tied to a property you own. "Okay," he said slowly, "but this isn't my fault." "It's not about fault," I snapped, sharper than I meant to. "It's about fixing it, about doing the right thing." He was silent again. I could hear the tension mounting behind his breath. When he finally spoke, his voice was clipped. "Rachel, I have 2 kids. You don't. We've got college savings to build, a mortgage, daycare. I can't just fork over 40 grand. My stomach twisted. "So you think I should?" "You're the one with no dependents, and you were close to them. I mean, you were practically managing their lives. Maybe they assumed you'd take care of things." There it was, that subtle shift from denial to justification, the same logic that had always underpinned the way our family worked. Rachel can handle it. Rachel will understand. Rachel will take the hit. I felt like I was back in high school, volunteering to skip the family vacation because Ethan needed a tutor. Back in my 20s, picking up shifts during holidays because Ethan's girlfriend wanted him around. Back in my 30s saying, "It's fine," when Mom and Dad helped him with a down payment, but told me they couldn't afford to contribute to my student loans. It wasn't just that they didn't offer, it was that they assumed I didn't need. "Do you know what they left me, Ethan?" I asked, voice trembling with fury. "Nothing. Not a cent. Not a piece of furniture. Not even a note." He didn't respond. "I spent over a decade being their everything. I coordinated their medical care. I paid their utility bills when they were behind. I missed years of my life taking care of them. And in return, they left you everything, and me this." "Look, I get you're upset," he said finally, his voice hardening. "But dragging me into a fight over something I didn't even know about isn't fair. I didn't ask for the house. They made that choice." "You didn't ask," I repeated, voice cold. "But you didn't object either." "They said you'd understand. Mom told me not to feel guilty." I laughed, bitter and flat. "That's rich. She hands you the estate, and all you had to do was not feel guilty. Meanwhile, I get crushed under a forged debt and still have to be the understanding one." "I'm not your enemy," he said. "Then act like it," I snapped. because right now you're hiding behind convenience and pretending this isn't your problem. But I'm not going to carry this alone, Ethan. I won't." The call ended without resolution. Just a polite kind of silence. An emotional shrug masked his distance. But his reaction told me everything I needed to know. He had no intention of helping, no intention of even acknowledging that what happened to me mattered. He had accepted the house, the inheritance, and all its advantages with both hands wide open. But when the debt, my debt, showed up on his doorstep, he closed them just as quickly. And suddenly, I wasn't just battling the ghost of my parents' betrayal. I was battling the living embodiment of everything they'd taught us, that Ethan deserved more, that I'd always be the one left cleaning up. That understanding was my obligation, and forgiveness was a burden I had to carry alone. I couldn't sleep that night. I stared at the ceiling of my apartment, blinds still open, letting the distant city lights paint streaks of orange across the walls. The same thoughts circled, louder than sirens outside. How long had they been planning this? What else didn't I know? By sunrise, I was digging. Not through my emotions, I didn't have time for that yet, but through paperwork. Old emails, medical records, tax documents I'd kept out of habit. I found a file box in the back of my closet labeled Mom and Dad. It had everything from medication schedules to scanned hospital bills, and even a folder full of scribbled Post-it notes with reminders in my mother's careful cursive, "Rachel, remind me to call Dr. Epstein-Twos. Don't forget the knee injection appointment, Friday." But what I didn't find were financial records, nothing about the house, no mortgage updates, no indication of a loan, which struck me as odd, given how often I was the one organizing the rest of their lives. I remembered asking my dad once if they needed help with their taxes. It had been a brutal flu season, and he'd seemed worn down. "I've got it handled," he said. "Just keep us alive, kiddo. You're already doing the heavy lifting." That was his way. Charm the truth into silence. But now, that silence was incriminating. I called the estate attorney the next day. His name was Charles Benedetti. He'd handled their will, the house title transfer, all the final paperwork. We'd only spoken once, briefly after my mother passed. When I told him about the loan, he was genuinely surprised. "There was no mention of an outstanding debt," he said. "Nothing in the estate's financial disclosures. Are you certain it's legitimate?" "I've seen the documents," I told him. "The bank has my name, my forged signature. The debt is real." "Then they intentionally kept it out of probate," he said flatly. "That's not just a moral lapse, Rachel. That's fraud." My heart stopped for a second. Fraud. The word made it real in a way it hadn't been before. This wasn't a bad decision. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was illegal. "What happens now?" I asked. "Well," he said slowly, "you could contest the will. If you can prove your parents misrepresented the estate's financial situation, the court might reopen the probate case. But it's a messy process and emotionally expensive, even if you win." "What about Ethan?" He sighed. "Unless he was complicit, he likely won't be held responsible. But any assets he received, especially the house, could be subject to liens or clawbacks if the estate is ruled fraudulent." I thanked him, hung up, and sat with that for a while. It was strange, how betrayal becomes a slow drip. Not a single wound, but a series of revelations that each slice a little deeper. My parents hadn't just favored my brother. They hadn't just taken from me. They had lied in ink, lied in silence, lied in every visit where they pretended there was no elephant in the room, just me, cooking dinner, changing bedpans, and believing, stupidly, that love meant we all mattered equally. And then I remembered the weekend in late 2018 when they sent me to a wellness retreat for my birthday. "You need a break," Mom had said. "You've done so much for us." It was the only time in 5 years I'd left them alone for more than a day. I had cried when they gave me the brochure. I thought it was love, gratitude. Now I realized that was when they signed the papers, when I was out of town, off the grid. They hadn't sent me away to say thank you. They sent me away so I couldn't stop them. I stood in the shower that night, water scalding hot, hoping the heat would wash off the sick, violated feeling that had sunk into my skin. I had loved them. I had served them. I had put their lives ahead of mine over and over again, and they had looked at me, their daughter, and seen a name to put on a loan they didn't want to be responsible for, a name to carry the debt, a daughter who didn't have kids. So who needed money anyway? They'd built that will brick by brick, lie by lie, and when they sealed it shut, they didn't think I'd ever be the one holding the wreckage. But I was. And now, I wasn't just holding it. I was ready to start tearing it apart. In the days that followed, I became a woman possessed. I pulled apart every piece of their estate like a forensic accountant and an abandoned daughter all rolled into one. I filed a request with the county clerk's office for property records. I contacted the bank's fraud department. I even emailed a friend of mine from college who worked at a law firm that specialized in estate litigation. But more than anything, I started asking a question I had spent my whole life avoiding. How did I become the one they could do this to? Because there's a pattern, isn't there? A script we all learn in our families. Ethan got to be the golden boy, the heir apparent, the one whose mediocrity was decorated with awards and whose bare minimum visits were treated like royal appearances. I was the one who held it all together. The reliable daughter, the unpaid nurse, the unofficial case manager, the emergency contact, and the emotional sponge. They didn't leave me out of the will by mistake. They left me out because they didn't see me as someone who needed anything. I was strong. It's a word that sounds like a compliment, but is usually a cage. I'd been told I was strong since I was old enough to understand what being quiet and useful got you. When Ethan threw tantrums, I was the one who picked up the broken crayons. When my mother had her migraines, I was the one who made toast for dinner. When my father drank too much and sulked in the den, I was the one who kept the volume down. No one taught me how to ask for things, only how to make do, and I was good at it. I was efficient, calm, smart, but I was also invisible in all the ways that mattered. I remember sitting with my mother after one of her surgeries, holding her hand as she came out of anesthesia. She was still groggy, muttering nonsense, and then she said, "Don't let them take me to that place. Rachel will take care of me. She always does." Not thank you. Not I love you. Just confirmation that I'd keep doing the job. They had come to see my care as a utility, not a sacrifice, not a love language, just what I did. And maybe, God help me, maybe I leaned into it too. Maybe I liked being the one who had it all handled. Maybe I needed to believe that taking care of them made me indispensable, that if I gave enough, I'd earn their love in return. Except love given conditionally isn't love at all. And when the inheritance came, it wasn't just a financial insult, it was a verdict. They chose Ethan. Not because he needed more, but because his needs were always more important. And mine were inconvenient, easy to ignore, too self-sufficient to be worth rewarding. That truth was a sledgehammer, and it cracked something open in me I hadn't realized was holding back decades of rage. For a week, I didn't answer Ethan's calls. I let them go to voicemail where he left increasingly defensive messages. I didn't ask for this. Don't take your issues with Mom and Dad out on me. We all process grief differently, Rachel. Grief. What I felt wasn't grief. It was betrayal soaked in disbelief. I had spent years being their solution, and now I was their loose end, the thing they tied a bow around and hoped no one would look at too closely. But I wasn't going to stay silent. I was done being the strong one if it meant being the forgotten one. So I printed every document. I highlighted every forged detail. I took photos of their signatures, mine. The difference is so subtle it made my stomach twist. I cataloged everything. Because if they thought I would carry this quietly, they didn't know me as well as they thought. And if Ethan wanted to hide behind the idea that I was just going through something, I'd give him something to go through. It was time to rewrite the story they had written for me, page by page. starting with the lie that being strong meant being silent. 2 weeks after that first call from the bank, I told Ethan we needed to meet in person. No more voicemails, no more half-truths over the phone. I wasn't going to be gaslit into second-guessing my memory or my moral compass. I wanted to look him in the face. I wanted him to see what this was doing to me. Not just the debt, though that alone was suffocating, but the fact that our parents had engineered an exit from this world where I was left cleaning up after their mess. Again, without thanks, without acknowledgement, and now without a choice. We agreed to meet at a cafe halfway between his suburb and the city, neutral ground. It was a sleek, corporate kind of place. Industrial lighting, polished concrete floors, the kind of spot that's designed to make people feel like they're having important conversations. When he walked in, he looked tired, or maybe just annoyed. He wore his business casual uniform, Patagonia vest, wedding ring catching the light, phone already buzzing in his hand. He sat down across from me, barely offering a hello. I didn't waste time. "I've gathered all the documents," I said, placing a folder on the table between us. "The bank records, the forged signature, the loan payments, the dates. It's not a theory anymore, Ethan, it's fact." He didn't reach for the folder, just glanced at it like it was radioactive. "So, what do you want from me?" he asked. There it was, 14 words that summed up everything about how he saw this, as a transaction, a problem to be fixed, not a wound to be acknowledged. "I want you to take responsibility," I said. "You inherited the house. You got the full estate. You're the legal owner of the asset that secured the loan. And more than that, you knew how much I gave to them. You knew I was taking care of them for years. And you said nothing." He leaned back, exhaled. "I didn't know about the loan." "But you knew I was the one keeping them afloat." "Yeah, because you chose that." I blinked. "Excuse me?" "You made yourself the caregiver, Rachel. You never asked for help. You just took it all on. I didn't stop you." "That's the point," I hissed. "You didn't stop me. You didn't show up. And now, when I'm drowning in a debt they forged in my name to protect your inheritance, you're still hiding behind convenience." He stared at me, jaw clenched. "What do you want me to do, Rachel? Sell the house? Move my kids into an apartment so you can clear a loan?" "Yes," I said flatly, "if that's what it takes." He laughed, humorless. "You're not serious." "I am. Or pay your share of the loan. Half, at least. I shouldn't have to go bankrupt because our parents decided I didn't deserve to be included in their estate, but was good enough to be shackled to their debt." He rubbed his temples. "This is insane. You're blowing everything out of proportion." "No," I snapped. "This is exactly the proportion. I was their daughter, too. I gave up more than you'll ever understand. Time, money, career moves, my sanity. And they left me with a bill and the expectation that I'd understand someday." He didn't say anything, so I leaned in closer. "And here's what you need to understand. If you don't make this right, I'll contest the will. I've already spoken to an attorney. I have enough evidence to file a civil claim for fraud and financial exploitation. I'll go after the estate, after the house, after you." His mouth opened, then closed. Shock, maybe, or shame. I couldn't tell. "I don't want it to come to that," I added. "But I'm done being the one who sacrifices quietly. I won't let you benefit from their manipulation while I foot the bill for their lies." A long silence followed. The clinking of coffee cups, some muted laughter from another table, and the low hum of some ambient jazz track playing overhead. Then finally, he spoke. "I need time to think." "You have a week," I said. "And if I don't hear from you, I'm filing." He stood, didn't shake my hand, didn't touch the folder, just walked out, shoulders tight, like the weight of everything was just starting to press in on him. I sat there a while longer, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel powerless. I felt angry, yes, betrayed, but I also felt clear. This wasn't just about a loan anymore. This was about drawing a line in the sand. I wasn't going to be the cleanup crew for this family anymore, and if it took burning down the last polite fiction of our bond to get justice, so be it. I wasn't just fighting for myself now, I was fighting for the version of me who spent years believing she was valued, only to learn she was just a contingency plan. That version of me deserved better, and I was going to make damn sure she got it. A few days after that cafe meeting, I received an unexpected package in the mail. No return address, just my name handwritten on the envelope in an old familiar scrawl. Inside was a yellowing letter, folded into thirds, a note from my parents, dated March 2021, over 2 years before they died. My breath caught as I unfolded it. Rachel, if you're reading this, it means something went wrong. Maybe we didn't explain ourselves in time. Maybe we didn't do this the right way, and for that, we're sorry. We want you to know that we always appreciated everything you did. Even if we didn't say it enough, we saw it. Every ride to the doctor, every dinner you made, every time you stepped in when we couldn't manage ourselves. You were our rock. We also know you'll understand why we did what we did. Your brother has a family now. Children. Responsibilities. We wanted to make sure they had a future, and that meant giving Ethan a foundation. The house, the assets. It's not because we loved you less. You're strong. You always have been. We hoped you'd see this not as favoritism, but as practicality. You'll understand one day. Love, Mom and Dad. I read it once, then twice, then tore it in half. Not out of rage, but because I had finally had enough of their cowardice masquerading as reason. They knew exactly what they were doing. That's why they wrote it, why they sealed it away instead of facing me while they were alive, because they knew what it would sound like out loud. We gave everything to your brother because he has children, because his life, his obligations, his path was more legitimate than yours. They reduced everything I gave them, my years, my time, my loyalty, to a footnote in a logistical decision. And still, they expected me to understand. I didn't cry. I'd passed that point weeks ago, but something inside me hardened in a new way, a clarity that wasn't angry or performative, just final. I thought back to the endless nights I'd spent filling their pill organizers, reading them paperwork they couldn't process, fighting on the phone with health insurance providers, cleaning the blood from my mother's chin after another fall, and I thought about the empty line in the will where my name should have been. I had hoped, somewhere deep down, that maybe they hadn't meant to leave me with nothing, that maybe it had been rushed, that maybe they had just forgotten to include me. But they hadn't. They had time. They had legal counsel. They had intentions. And they had written this letter to justify what they must have known I'd see as betrayal. They called me strong, again, a word that had become a trap. As if strength cancels need. As if not being a mother meant I didn't deserve a legacy. As if responsibility was its own reward, and being self-sufficient meant I should be left behind. I burned the letter that night, lit a match over the sink, watched the paper curl into blackened petals, let the words become ash. It felt like a funeral, not for them, but for the version of me who had spent her life trying to earn her place in a family that had already decided she didn't need one. That same night, I wrote my own letter, not to them, to myself. I detailed every way I had shown up when no one else had. I listed every sacrifice, every moment of care, every act of love, not because I needed validation, but because I needed to remember that I was never the problem. They were. Their failure to love fairly, their inability to see that not needing help doesn't mean not deserving kindness. I tucked the letter into the back of my journal, because even though they'd left me a debt, they would not leave me without a record of who I really was. And even if no one else ever acknowledged what I did, what I gave, I would. Because I deserved that. And I would not let their silence define my worth any longer. The following Monday, I walked into my lawyer's office armed with spreadsheets, annotated bank statements, and a fire in my gut that wouldn't quit. I'd spent the weekend tallying the full cost of what I had poured into my parents' lives. Medical bills I paid out of pocket, groceries, home repairs, back taxes, caregiving hours that stole weekends, holidays, years. My total, $146,700, and that was conservative. When my lawyer, Amanda, skimmed the pages, she looked up at me with something between admiration and disbelief. "You've done your homework." "I've done my time," I said. She nodded, her voice steady and professional. "We have a case. It won't be clean, but it's real. We're looking at unjust enrichment, possible financial fraud, and depending on how far they manipulated things, maybe even elder abuse statutes, though that's a gray area since you were the one being abused financially." The words landed heavily, but not with shock. They made sense. Finally. We filed the petition to contest the will that Friday. The legal wheels turned slowly, grinding through paperwork and court schedules. But something shifted in me the moment we filed. For the first time, I wasn't asking for fairness. I was demanding accountability. Ethan's lawyer responded within 2 weeks. Predictably, he labeled the filing as emotionally motivated and without material basis. But he also requested a private mediation in the interest of preserving familial peace. That made me laugh. Out loud. The audacity. Preserving peace in a war they started while I was cooking their dinners and cleaning their blood-off tile floors. We met in a bland, overlit conference room downtown, the kind that smells like burnt coffee and carpet glue. Ethan sat across from me, looking more worn than I'd ever seen him, like someone who was finally realizing that consequences were real. His lawyer did most of the talking, offered me a settlement, $30,000, a check and a confidentiality agreement, no admission of wrongdoing, no mention of the forged documents, just a sum of money that couldn't even cover the loan they left me with. I didn't respond. I just slid the spreadsheet across the table. The room went quiet. I saw Ethan flinch at the total. "This isn't about greed," I said, locking eyes with him. "This is about truth. And the truth is, you got a house. I got a forged signature and a financial noose around my neck, and I'm not signing anything until I see real restitution." The lawyer whispered something to Ethan. He nodded barely. Then he spoke. Quiet, tired, no pretense this time. "What do you want, Rachel?" It was the first honest question he had asked me in months, and I didn't hesitate. "I want the house sold. I want half the proceeds, and I want you to pay the remaining balance on the loan that your inheritance was supposed to cover." He looked stunned. "That's basically everything." "That's the point," I said. "You don't get to keep the reward when it came from someone else's sacrifice." There was a long pause. His lawyer said they'd need time. I said fine. I walked out of that building into the fading light of early evening and felt something uncoil in my chest. Not joy, not yet, but a kind of uprightness I hadn't felt in years. I had spent too long begging for recognition in whispers. Now I had a voice, a legal one, a financial one, a moral one, and it was louder than their will. Because I wasn't asking to be loved anymore, I was asking to be seen. And if they wouldn't do it while they were alive, I'd make sure their legacy did it for them. The offer came 2 weeks later. Ethan's attorney sent it in a bland, sterile email. My client agrees to sell the property and divide the net proceeds 50-50 after expenses. Additionally, he will assume full responsibility for the outstanding loan balance. This offer is contingent upon your withdrawal of the petition to contest the will and your agreement not to pursue further legal action against the estate or beneficiaries. It wasn't a generous offer. It was the bare minimum of decency dressed in legal caution. But it was everything I had asked for. I stared at the email for a long time, not out of uncertainty, but because I wanted to feel the full weight of what it represented. This wasn't a victory in the way movies portray them. No courtroom fireworks, no tearful apology from my brother, No letter from beyond the grave confessing my parents had misunderstood me. This was quiet, exhausting, expensive in every possible way. But it was mine. It was proof that I hadn't imagined the injustice, that my anger wasn't misplaced, that my instincts, so long ignored for the sake of keeping peace, had been correct all along. I met Ethan one last time to sign the paperwork, this time in the presence of a mediator. The room was cold, impersonal, legal pads, coffee cups, and years of silent resentment sitting between us like a third sibling. He looked worn, thinner maybe. Not from guilt, I don't think, but from the discomfort of confrontation. "I never wanted it to be like this," he said. I looked at him calmly. "It didn't have to be." He nodded. "I thought I was doing what they asked." "No," I said. "You did what they expected. You just didn't question if it was right." He didn't argue. He didn't apologize either. I didn't need him to. Not anymore. We signed the documents. The sale of the house was set in motion. The bank would be paid in full. The rest would come to me in a few months. Afterward, he stood awkwardly, like he might say something else. But he didn't. Just gave a shallow nod and left. That night, I sat alone on my couch with a glass of wine and opened the email from the escrow company. I stared at the digital signature confirming the property was in escrow. It was real. Final. I wouldn't have the house, no. I wouldn't inherit memories restored or years returned. But I would have justice and something else, something I hadn't realized I was fighting for the whole time. Dignity. My parents had mistaken my independence for invulnerability. They thought I could carry the weight without breaking, and in a way, they were right. I did carry it. But that didn't mean it didn't cost me. What they never understood, what so many families don't, is that the strong one isn't strong because they want to be. They're strong because everyone else gets the freedom to be fragile. They left me to mop up their mess, then erased me from the rewards. And still, they expected me to smile and call it love. But love without equity isn't love. It's control. It's convenience. And I was done with all of that. In the weeks that followed, I started to feel the fog lift, not all at once, but slowly. I began sleeping through the night again. I picked up projects I'd postponed. I saw friends without glancing at my phone every few minutes to check if my parents needed something. I lived. And when the first payment from the house sale hit my account, I didn't feel rich. I felt righted. Like something had finally balanced in a life that had been tilting off center for far too long. And in that moment, I understood something my parents never had. Peace isn't the absence of conflict, it's the presence of fairness. And I'd finally bought mine, with a calculator, a court date, and the last of my patience. A month after the house closed, I drove past it one last time. The shutters had been repainted, the porch light fixed, and a young couple stood on the front steps, holding a child in one arm and a box of books in the other. I didn't stop. I didn't need to. That house, my parents' house, the one I kept standing through late-night payments and weekend repairs, was no longer a shrine or a scar. It was someone else's project now, and I was free. Not in the cinematic, triumphant sense. There was no soundtrack, no applause, just a slow, steady return to myself after years of being eclipsed by duty and denial. I took part of the settlement money and finally did something for myself. I signed a lease on a place with south-facing windows and enough space to breathe. No secondhand furniture, no emergency bags packed for hospital overnights. Just a clean slate, warm light, and silence that wasn't heavy anymore. I hired a financial advisor, an actual one, and we rebuilt the retirement savings I'd cannibalized to keep my parents afloat. I increased my hours with my best clients and dropped the ones who drained me. Most importantly, I started therapy again. Not the crisis management kind I'd squeezed in during my caregiving years, but deep, reflective work. I was ready to ask the hard questions. Why did I think I had to earn love with labor? Why did silence feel safer than speaking up? Why did I mistake self-sacrifice for self-worth? Those questions didn't yield easy answers, but they gave me something better: awareness. And with that awareness came a kind of internal renovation. The woman who had spent her 30s patching up aging parents, balancing debt, and clenching her teeth through family holidays no longer existed. In her place was someone deliberate, unapologetic, still kind, but no longer compliant. Ethan and I didn't speak much after the settlement. He sent a brief message when the wire transfers were finalized. "Glad we could find closure. Hope things settle down for you." I didn't respond. There was nothing else to say. Closure wasn't something he could give me. I had built it myself, brick by brick. My relationship with my parents, though frozen in time, shifted in my mind. The pedestal they once stood on had crumbled, but in its place stood something more honest. I could remember the good, the bedtime stories, my mother's apple pie, the way my father lit up when he talked about astronomy, but I could also remember the bad, the manipulation, the betrayal, the way they framed inequality as necessity. And I could hold all of that at once without crumbling. That, I learned, is real strength, not carrying the weight for everyone else, but refusing to deny your pain just to keep the peace. And that strength gave me the courage to do something I never thought I'd do. I started designing a foundation, not metaphorically, literally, a nonprofit, small, local, focused on providing support for adult caregivers, legal resources, mental health services, emergency financial aid, because I wasn't the only one. I'd met others in group therapy, in online forums, in coffee shop conversations that began with, "I know it's not the same, but..." There were so many of us, invisible support systems, people whose lives had been rerouted by responsibility, and who, more often than not, were left behind when the last will was read. I didn't need revenge. I needed to turn my pain into prevention. I needed to build something that said, "We see you, you matter." And maybe, just maybe, I needed to write a new kind of legacy. One my parents would never understand, but one I could be proud of. It's been just over a year since I stood in that mediator's office and signed away the last illusion I had about my family. A year since I walked out, not just with half of a house's worth, but with the shattered remains of decades of expectations I hadn't realized I was still carrying. I thought, at the beginning, that I wanted fairness, that if I just kept tallying everything I had given, every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every dollar drained from my savings, I could prove that I deserved what was withheld from me. But what I've learned is that fairness in families like mine is a myth that only lives on the surface. You dig even a little, and underneath it are the unspoken rules. The golden child gets the rewards. The responsible one gets the burden. And everyone is expected to smile and call that balance. What I wanted, what I needed, was not money, not property, not even an apology. I needed to stop being the daughter who waited for recognition, like a dog waits for scraps under the table. I needed to stop hoping the people who benefited from my silence would one day thank me for it. And I needed to give myself what no one else ever had: permission. Permission to grieve, not just my parents, but the years I lost to being useful instead of loved. Permission to be angry without softening the blow for someone else's comfort. Permission to say, I deserved more, and not flinch. The foundation I launched, CareShift, now has over 100 active members. We've helped adult caregivers file for housing support, legal guidance, and therapy access. Every workshop, every resource, every late-night call with someone who whispers, "I didn't know I was allowed to ask for help," feels like another brick laid in a life I built on my own terms. I used to believe that being child-free made me expendable in the eyes of my family, that because I wasn't carrying on a bloodline, my worth had to be measured in output. But I see it differently now. I didn't need to create children to leave a legacy. I created boundaries, a foundation, a life, and the echoes of that choice are louder and more lasting than any heirloom ever could be. Ethan and I still don't talk. Maybe someday we will, maybe we won't. I've stopped needing to rehearse forgiveness just to be ready when someone finally decides to earn it. My parents are gone. Their decisions were permanent, but their control over my story wasn't. The real inheritance, I've come to understand, is the one I crafted from the ashes: resilience, self-respect, and the freedom to walk away without dragging their debt, emotional or financial, behind me. If you're reading this because you've been the strong one, the caretaker, the reliable anchor that everyone assumes doesn't need to be seen, this is what I want you to know. You are allowed to want fairness. You are allowed to speak up. You are allowed to stop carrying everyone else's weight. And if no one ever hands you the inheritance you deserve, you can build your own, one truth at a time, one boundary at a time, one bold, unashamed decision at a time. Because strength isn't what you show to others. It's what you reclaim for yourself.